Not every beach is a place of joy, laughter, and serenity. Some shores hide secrets, buried under the sands and whispered through the crashing waves. Locals speak in hushed tones of places no one dares to visit, warning travelers of curses and dangers lurking in the dark. This was one such beach, a stretch of sand cursed by its history, a graveyard for those who refuse to heed its warnings. But for Sarah, Adil, Zoya, and Bilal, it was just another adventure, another story to laugh about later. Or so they thought. The waves crashed against the shore, but the sound felt distant, almost muted, as if the sea was holding its breath. Sarah, Adil, Zoya, and Bilal unloaded their gear from the car, their laughter cutting through the cool evening air. The beach stretched wide before them, empty and serene under the fading sunlight. It looked peaceful, but there was something off. The sand felt colder than it should, and the breeze carried a faint, salty scent mixed with something metallic. Zoya hesitated for a moment, glancing at the water. "Doesn't it feel weird here?" she asked, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Adil rolled his eyes. "It's a beach, Zoya. Stop overthinking." As they set up their tents near the edge of the cove, Bilal wandered closer to the shoreline. His flashlight beam danced over the darkened sand until it caught something shiny, half buried near the water's edge. Curiosity got the better of him, and he crouched down, brushing away the wet sand to reveal an intricate necklace. The metal was tarnished, and the pendant, a spiral carved with strange symbols, looked ancient. "Guys, check this out," Bilal called, holding it up. The others gathered around him, and Sarah frowned. "It looks old. Maybe you shouldn't touch it." Bilal laughed. "What's it gonna do? Curse me?" His joke fell flat, and a strange silence followed. A sudden wave surged up, soaking their feet and the edge of their tent. The water receded quickly, almost too quickly, leaving the necklace dry despite the soaking sand. They laughed it off, though the mood had shifted. By the time they finished their dinner, the sun had disappeared, replaced by a pale crescent moon that barely lit the surroundings. The fire crackled weakly, as if the air itself was too damp to sustain it. Zoya sat closer to the flames, her arms wrapped around her knees. "Do you think there's any truth to the stories about this place?" she asked, her eyes darting toward the water. Adil sighed dramatically. "Zoya, it's just a beach. No witches, no curses, no ghosts. Can we enjoy the trip without this spooky nonsense?" The whispers started faintly, almost like the breeze carried voices from far away. At first, no one noticed. Then Sarah froze, her gaze fixed on the ocean. "Did you hear that?" she asked. Bilal tilted his head, listening. "It's just the wind," he said, though his voice didn't carry its usual confidence. But the sound grew louder, words they couldn't quite understand, and with it came a chill that seeped into their bones. The fire flickered, struggling against the sudden gust of cold air that seemed to come from the water itself. Before anyone could say anything, a loud splash echoed from the cove. All four turned toward the sound, their flashlights cutting through the darkness but finding nothing. The ocean shimmered faintly under the moonlight, and for a brief moment, they thought they saw a figure standing on the rocks far out in the water. A woman, her long hair tangled, her outline distorted by the waves. But as quickly as she appeared, she was gone. Adil laughed nervously. "It's probably just a shadow or something. We're scaring ourselves for no reason." But none of them could shake the feeling that something was watching them. The whispers continued, growing softer and more distant until they blended into the sound of the waves. As the night deepened, the wind grew colder, and the waves seemed to crash harder against the shore, though the tide remained still. Inside their tents, Sleep came uneasily for all of them. Zoya kept tossing and turning, her eyes snapping open every few minutes as if someone was calling her name just outside. Sarah lay wide awake, staring at the roof of the tent, her mind replaying the faint outline of the woman they had seen on the rocks. It didn't feel like a trick of the light. It felt real. Too real. She clenched her fists, telling herself it was just her imagination. Outside, Bilal had crept out of his tent, unable to resist the pull of the necklace. He sat by the fading fire, holding it up to the moonlight. The spiral pendant seemed to glint faintly, almost as if it had a pulse of its own. His curiosity was stronger than his fear, and he traced his fingers over the strange symbols. "What are you hiding?" he whispered to himself. As he turned the pendant over, he noticed something etched on the back. Letters in a language he didn't recognize. His heart thudded as the pendant grew colder in his hand. Suddenly, he heard a splash behind him. Turning sharply, he aimed his flashlight at the water. The beam caught ripples on the surface, but no one was there. "Adil," he called out, his voice shaky. No answer. He stood up, his flashlight flickering, and his breathing grew heavier. Another splash echoed, louder this time, closer to the shore. Then he saw it, a figure standing knee-deep in the water. It was a woman, her long hair dripping over her face, her body swaying unnaturally, as if the current controlled her movements. Bilal froze. "Hello?" he said, his voice cracking. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she slowly tilted her head, her wet hair parting just enough to reveal a pale, lifeless face. Her eyes glowed faintly, like two green orbs cutting through the dark. Bilal stumbled backward, his foot hitting the edge of the fire pit. The embers flared for a second, and the woman's face twisted into a sharp, toothy grin. Then she moved, too fast for something wading through water, rushing toward him. Bilal dropped the necklace, scrambling back toward the tents, his screams piercing the silence. The others bolted upright, rushing out of their tents to find him lying in the sand, gasping for breath. "What happened?" Sarah shouted, shaking him. Bilal pointed toward the water, his words tumbling out incoherently. She's out there. I saw her. She's real." Adil grabbed his flashlight, shining it toward the shore, but there was nothing. The water lapped gently against the sand, as if nothing had happened. "You probably just scared yourself," Adil muttered, though his voice carried a hint of doubt. "I'm telling you, she was there," Bilal shouted, his eyes wide with terror. Sarah noticed the necklace lying a few feet away. Its faint glow had disappeared, and it looked dull, lifeless. She picked it up cautiously, holding it out to him. "Was this what you were messing with?" she asked. Bilal nodded, his hands trembling. Zoya's voice broke the tension. "I told you. There's something wrong with this place. We need to leave. Now." But before anyone could respond, a low, guttural sound echoed from the water. It wasn't a splash, nor the sound of waves. It was something deeper, almost like a growl. They all froze, their flashlights aimed toward the ocean. The figure was back, standing further out now, half submerged in the water. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle, and her green eyes locked onto them. Slowly, she raised one hand, pointing directly at the group. The wind picked up suddenly, whipping around them as the waves grew taller and more violent. The fire extinguished completely, leaving them in total darkness, except for the faint glow of their flashlights. "Run," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. But before they could move, the whispers returned, louder and clearer this time, as if the words were being spoken directly into their ears. "You should not have come here." The group sprinted toward the car, their flashlights bouncing wildly in the dark. The whispers grew louder, blending with the crashing waves and the howling wind. Each step felt heavier, as if the sand beneath their feet was trying to pull them back toward the water. Bilal tripped, falling face first into the cold, damp sand. Sarah and Zoya turned back to help him, but before they could reach him, the whispers suddenly stopped. A deathly silence fell over the beach. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she saw Bilal frozen in place, staring wide-eyed at something behind them. She turned slowly, her heart pounding. The figure was now closer, standing on the wet sand just a few feet away. Her hair dripped like seaweed, her face twisted with anger, and her glowing green eyes seemed to pierce through them. "You disturbed my rest," she said, her voice a mix of rage and sorrow, echoing unnaturally around them. "Stay back," Adil shouted, holding up his flashlight like a weapon. The beam of light hit her face, but instead of flinching, she smiled, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. With a wave of her hand, the flashlight flickered and died. The darkness swallowed them whole. "Give it back," the witch demanded, her voice growing deeper, more guttural. Sarah, trembling, held up the necklace. "We didn't mean to disturb you," she said, her voice shaking. "Take it. We'll leave. Please, just let us go." She stepped forward cautiously, placing the necklace on the sand. For a moment, the witch stood still, her gaze fixed on the pendant. The group held their breath, hoping it was over. But instead of retreating, the witch's grin widened. "It's too late," she whispered. The ground beneath them began to shake, and the sand felt as though it were moving, shifting under their feet. Zoya screamed as something cold and slimy wrapped around her ankle, pulling her toward the water. Sarah and Bilal grabbed her arms, pulling her back with all their strength, but the grip tightened, dragging all three of them closer to the waves. Adil stood frozen, his flashlight useless in his hands. He couldn't move, couldn't think. The witch turned her glowing eyes on him. "You're the reason they're here," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You laughed at my warning. Now you'll pay the price." "No," Sarah shouted, letting go of Zoya to push Adil. "Run, you idiot." The force of her shove broke him out of his trance, and he stumbled backward, finally snapping into action. He grabbed a piece of driftwood and swung it wildly, hitting the slimy tendrils holding Zoya. They recoiled with a hiss, retreating into the water. The group scrambled back toward the car, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The witch stood at the edge of the waves, watching them with her haunting, glowing eyes. "You cannot escape the ocean," she said, her voice fading into the sound of the waves. "It will always find you." They piled into the car, slamming the doors shut and locking them. Adil fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them. "Hurry up!" Zoya screamed, tears streaming down her face. Adil finally managed to start the car, and they sped away from the beach, the headlights cutting through the darkness. No one spoke. The only sound was the labored breathing of four terrified friends. Sarah glanced into the rearview mirror, her heart stopping as she saw a figure standing in the middle of the road behind them. It was the witch, her green eyes glowing faintly in the distance, her silhouette growing smaller as they drove further away. But as they turned a corner and the beach disappeared from view, the whispers returned, faint but unmistakable. They weren't coming from outside. They were inside the car. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around them like an invisible force. The air inside the car turned icy, and the windows fogged up, obscuring their view of the road. Adil tightened his grip on the wheel, his knuckles white. "What's happening?" he yelled, panic taking over. Sarah turned to Bilal, who was clutching his head, his face pale. "They're in my mind," he muttered. "I can hear her. She's not done with us." Zoya screamed, pointing at the rearview mirror. The witch's face appeared on the fogged glass, her sharp grin spreading wider as her glowing eyes locked onto them. You took something that was never yours. Her voice boomed, filling the car. Now, the sea will take you. A loud bang shook the vehicle as the car swerved uncontrollably. The headlights flickered, and the engine began to sputter. No, 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 Adil shouted, desperately trying to regain control. The car skidded to a stop on the side of the road. The whispers stopped. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the sound of their ragged breaths. Is she gone? Zoya whispered, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, the car doors unlocked by themselves, one by one. A cold, salty breeze rushed in, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of crashing waves. But they were far from the beach. Sarah's eyes widened as she saw water seeping into the car from beneath, pooling around their feet. It rose quickly, soaking their legs. We're not safe, she said, her voice barely audible. Bilal reached for the necklace in his pocket, realizing he had taken it back instinctively before they left the beach. Maybe if we give it back? He started, but the water surged upward, pulling the necklace from his hand and dragging him out of the car. His screams echoed as the others watched in horror, frozen in place. The water stopped rising, leaving the car in eerie silence. The remaining three sat motionless, their breaths shallow. Sarah opened the door cautiously, stepping onto dry ground, the water gone, as if it had never been there. We have to leave, she said firmly. Zoya and Adil followed her, looking around frantically. There was no sign of Bilal. The road ahead stretched empty, but the ocean's roar seemed closer than ever. As they walked, the whispers returned, softer this time, almost mocking. Adil stopped abruptly, clutching his chest. I can't breathe, he choked. Before Sarah and Zoya could react, he collapsed to the ground. His skin turned pale, his lips blue, as if he were drowning without water. Zoya screamed, pulling him, but it was too late. His lifeless body lay still, the whispers growing louder around them. Sarah grabbed Zoya's arm. We have to keep moving, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. The two stumbled forward, the road stretching endlessly into darkness. Behind them, the faint glow of the witch's green eyes appeared again, following them relentlessly. The screen fades to black as the sound of waves and whispers intensifies. A haunting voice echoes. You can run, but you can never escape the sea. If this story sent chills down your spine, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another tale of terror. Share this with someone who loves a good scare, if you dare.